Here with you with today's key game for the West Virginia game coming up this weekend. The Mountaineers take on the Oklahoma State Cowboys at home. Jared, coming off just as heartbreaking a loss as you possibly could ever have on the road at Houston, losing on a Hail Mary last weekend has to be difficult to overcome. What do you think it's going to take for the Mountaineers to beat the Cowboys at home?
That's exactly one of my keys to the game. I mean, how do we bounce back? We lose and seemingly we find new ways to lose over the past years. So you go back to Pitt to start the season last year. That was just this devastating performance right off the bat. And we lost to Kansas at home. And really that was how they kind of generated some momentum. So I think it's really going to be important to see how the Mountaineers bounce back in a home environment. I like that you come back home, but if you come out flat, Oklahoma State's they're playing a lot better than they were. So I think that's one of the primary keys for me coming back home.
Yeah, I think that's a good one, Jared. And if you heard Neil Brown on his weekly radio show today, one of the things he said is it was really difficult in the first couple of days after what happened down in Houston happened. 24, 48 hours, really hard. But then once he pulled himself up off the couch, he went recruiting, started to think about, how can we bounce back? And then it becomes a challenge. And it's like, okay, we've got a really improved Oklahoma State team coming in. It's won back-to-back games against ranked teams at home, albeit at home. What can we do to try to get things back on track? And Tony mentioned, Neil had said a couple of times that, he had a team, I think it's talking about this year's Troy team, who ended up winning. If you go back to last year through this year, they lost a really close game last year. I can't remember who the opponent was, but then reeled off like 10 straight after that. And West Virginia was a good example that Tony Caridi had brought up and Neil agreed with. Back I was in college, so it would have been 2003 season, maybe. Is that the year when West Virginia goes down to Miami? Should have beat them. You have the Quincy Wilson run play. You go ahead, and then Kellen Winslow comes back and wins the game for you. And so West Virginia won 7 games after that loss, after getting crushed at the end. You were so close to beating Miami. They had been your nemesis. You had so much difficulty beating them over the years. And so it would be great if we could just harness this, the disappointment that you feel, turn it into effort and energy and focus, and then come out and reel off several straight. My key to the game really is, how is West Virginia going to defend Oklahoma State's run game, which has just been consistent with the way Oklahoma State has been able to turn around their season. Their run game has really turned it around, and that is primarily the result of what Ollie Gordon has done. If you look at the last 3 games, 2 of whom were against ranked opponents. The last game against Kansas last weekend, 29 carries, 168 yards. He also caught over 100 yards in the air. Before that, against Kansas State, ran for 136 yards on the ground and 121 at Iowa State. Before that, he's been one of the absolute keys on offense for them for their turnaround, averaging 6.7 yards per carry at Iowa State, 6.5 against Kansas State, and then 5.8 last week against Kansas. West Virginia, if it wants to win this game, is absolutely going to have to shut down Oklahoma State's run game. And you may not shut them down completely, but if you hold Gordon to, say, 70 yards, if you keep him from breaking off at one of those 30, 40, 50-yarders, then I think you really give yourself a chance. And I'm sure West Virginia is going to try to do that. Historically, West Virginia has been good at stopping the run. The question is what will happen Saturday, and I think that's a big key to the game.
Yeah, I do think that's an interesting matchup, and it reminds me of the Chuba Hubbard team from a few years ago when they came in here. The difference was the defense, and their defense was absolutely lights out. We really struggled to move the ball in that game, and that's the final key to me is, how do our receivers perform against their cornerbacks? Traditionally, they run a lot of man defense, and they want to jam you. They will come up. They will press you at the line. Our receivers are a weaker point for us. We don't have depth from transfer portal issues. We've had a couple of players leave mid-season. So we've got 2 receivers that are former walk-ons that are in the 2 deep. So albeit they've performed well, but how do they perform against Oklahoma State playing a press defense? So last week, Jason Bean throws for 410 yards at Oklahoma State. The week prior, Will Howard comes in and throws for only 152.
Yep.
So I think it's going to be just an interesting dynamic to see if Garrett Green can keep up with the passing yards. Can the Mountaineers, they kind of shifted gears and went away from the run game a lot more than we had seen prior to the game at Houston.
Well,
So
one of the keys, so it's a really good point. And I think one of the keys to the passing game is going to be, can you get the running game going, or at least can Garrett Green give you enough of a threat in the QB run game off of the option game to give you enough of a threat to keep maybe those corners from jamming up so much, and maybe you're able to open things up in the pass game that way too. We'll see.
And Wyatt Milam is going to be back this weekend, so that should assist with pass protection. So we've got 3:30 ESPN game this Saturday. Mountaineers come back home against the Cowboys from Stillwater.